On a bright winter morning in a Maine harbor, retired Navy SEAL diver Dane Ostrander counted 37 steps down to the water. He had survived the sea before, but the sound of a rising tide still knew how to find him. Then he saw a German shepherd stranded on a frozen pier, too exhausted to bark, yet still staring toward one old concrete pipe. The dog's collar held only a worn fragment of a name, Fathom. What looked like clear water beneath the harbor would soon test a whole town's courage, and Dane would have to choose between proving himself right or doing the harder thing, waiting until the truth could stand. Share your own touching story about an animal you love, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Bracken Cove looked almost innocent after snow. By sunrise, the roofs of the fish sheds were white and clean. The lobster traps stacked along the harbor wore soft caps of frost, and the lines tied to the eastern pier had frozen into stiff black ropes. The bay beyond them shone blue-gray under the winter light, calm enough to make a stranger believe the town had been built for postcards instead of work. Dane Ostrander knew better. Every beautiful thing on the Maine coast had teeth. Ice hid on planks. Fog erased distance. A quiet tide could lift a boat, loosen a line, shift a hull, and turn a safe dock into a question. Dane had spent most of his adult life listening to water. He had learned that it never stopped speaking. Men simply got tired and stopped translating. He parked his harbor patrol truck above the east pier, shut off the engine, and sat for one breath longer than necessary. The tide was falling. That helped. He checked the tide clock mounted near the dash anyway. Then he looked toward the pier stairs. 37 steps. He had counted them the first week he took the job. He had counted them every workday since. The habit would have embarrassed another man. Dane had outlived embarrassment. He was 53, 6'3", broad through the shoulders, with the dense practical strength of a man who had carried gear through worse weather than any gym could invent. His hair was dark brown with silver at both temples, cut short at the sides and longer on top, usually dragged into disorder by the wind. A close salt and pepper beard shadowed his jaw. His eyes were a pale gray blue, steady enough to make people think he was calm. He was not calm. He was disciplined. There was a difference. Dane stepped out into the cold. His olive-drab combat shirt fit close under a slate-blue harbor patrol jacket, the camouflage sleeves tucked into weatherproof gloves. Horizontal bands across the upper arms made the shirt look more military than he preferred, but it moved well under a coat and dried fast. Function, he told himself, was not memory. He started down. 1, 2, 3. The sound of boots on frozen wood carried too clearly in the morning. 4, 5, 6. Below him, the water moved between pilings with a hollow, patient sound. On some mornings, that sound was only water. On others, it became something else before he could stop it. The remembered slosh of a compartment taking on water, a diver's breathing turning wrong over the comms, a voice trying not to sound afraid. 7, 8, 9. He kept counting. Not because the steps mattered, because the number did. At the bottom, Maeve Calloway stood near the harbor office, with a radio clipped to her orange and navy parka and a paper cup steaming in one gloved hand. Maeve was 56, straight-backed, sharp-eyed, with a blunt bob of black and silver hair mostly hidden under a knit cap. She had run Bracken Cove Harbor long enough that gulls probably filed complaints with her before stealing bait. "You made it all the way down," she said. Dane looked at her. "Morning to you, too. I was being supportive. You were counting. I was observing a municipal employee safely using stairs." He took the paper cup she offered. Black coffee, no sugar. Maeve remembered things without making a ceremony of it. Past the harbor office, North Star Marine Foods was already awake at the far end of the water. Its long metal building sat under winter sun, vents breathing pale steam, loading bay doors opening and closing as trucks moved through. North Star kept half the town employed in some season or another: processing, freezing, hauling, maintenance, packaging, paperwork. Its name was on baseball banners, firehouse fundraisers, winter coat drives. In Bracken Cove, people could complain about North Star all they wanted, but most did it while cashing checks that had passed through the company's hands. Maeve nodded toward a clipboard tucked under her arm. "We got another complaint." "About what?" "You know what." Dane did. For 3 nights, drivers from North Star had reported a stray German Shepherd near the tanker road. Big dog, yellow and black. No owner, no leash. According to the drivers, it had stood in the road and forced them to brake on icy pavement. One man claimed it stared at his truck like it was taking inventory. "Animal control?" Dane asked. "They're short-staffed until noon. Cyrus called me before breakfast." Of course he had. Cyrus Fenwick, North Star's operations director, had a voice that could make a warning sound like civic duty. Dane had met him twice. Clean jacket, steel gray hair combed back, face weathered just enough to prove local roots without suggesting he still did local work. What did he say? That if a loose dog causes an accident, the town will be answering questions no one can afford. Maeve sipped her coffee. Then he mentioned 160 adult workers, depending on North Star, getting through winter. Subtle. He's never subtle. He's polite. People confused the two. Dane looked toward the loading bays. A white tanker rolled slowly out, tires crunching over packed snow. Nothing about it seemed unusual. A driver making a run. A factory doing business. A town continuing because stopping was too expensive. "You think the dog's dangerous?" Maeve asked. "I think a dog loose around tankers on black ice is a problem." That wasn't the question. Dane watched the tanker turn inland. "I don't know the dog." The words were plain, but they stayed with him through the first hour of patrol. He checked the public gangway, the fuel dock, the lower float, and the old rope shed whose back wall still leaned a little more every storm. He marked 2 boards for replacement, cleared warning tape from a previous washout, and called in a bent cleat near Pier 3. Work helped. Specific tasks were kind. A loose bolt wanted tightening. A split plank wanted marking. A frozen latch wanted heat and patience. None of them asked a man to forgive himself. Near mid-morning, Dane headed south toward the abandoned pier. Most tourists never walked that far. In summer, teenagers sometimes dared one another onto the first few planks until Maeve threatened fines with enough sincerity to ruin the game. In winter, the place looked less like a pier than the remains of an old decision. Broken pilings, warped boards, a narrow finger of timber reaching toward water that had stopped pretending to be friendly. Dane stopped before the warning chain. At first he thought the sound was ice, a scrape. Then another. Not the shifting crack of frozen edges. Not rope, not gulls, claws. He stepped closer, lowering his center of gravity by habit. The southern waterline lay bright under sun, broken by plates of thin ice bumping softly against the pilings. Beyond the last standing section of the abandoned pier, a single old mooring post rose from the water, capped with snow and rimed with salt. On it stood the German Shepherd. For a moment, Dane simply stared. The dog was black and tan, soaked through the chest and legs, its coat darkened by seawater. It stood with all 4 paws crowded onto the narrow top of the old post, body trembling, tail low. One ear stood upright, the other tilted slightly outward as if shaped by some old injury. Its eyes were amber, fixed not on Dane, not on the shore, but past the pier toward the old concrete outfall that jutted from the rocks a little farther south. The dog did not bark. That was the thing that moved Dane first. A frightened animal might bark, lunge, cry, waste strength on panic. This dog only stood, as if it had decided fear could wait. "All right," Dane said softly. "I see you." The dog's ear twitched. Dane backed away and called Maeve. "Found your complaint," he said. "Alive? For now. Location, Old South Pier. Stranded on a mooring post. Ice between him and shore." Maeve swore under her breath. "Don't do anything stupid before I get there. I would never." That lie was lazy, Ostrander. He ended the call and went for the skiff tied near the service float. The small harbor skiff was aluminum, practical, and ugly in the honest way of municipal equipment. Dane checked the fuel line, oar, throw rope, blanket, and boat hook. His hands moved quickly, not hurried. Hurry was how men made simple tasks complicated. Then he stepped aboard. Water tapped the hull, a small sound, harmless. His chest tightened anyway. The skiff shifted beneath his boots, and the harbor sound changed around him. Wood creaked, ice scratched aluminum. Somewhere deep in his memory, a warning tone became a voice, and the voice became a young man trying not to panic in the dark. Dane closed his eyes for half a second. The tide was falling. The skiff was not a flooded chamber. The dog was still standing. He opened his eyes and pushed off. Each yard across the water seemed longer than it should have. Ice plates nudged the skiff and spun away. The dog watched now, not with hope exactly, but with a fierce attention that made Dane feel judged by something older than language. "Don't make this heroic," Dane muttered. "Heroic gets people paperwork." The dog blinked once. Maeve arrived at the pier as Dane eased the skiff alongside the mooring post. She did not shout instructions. That was one reason he trusted her. She stood ready with a line and let him work. "Easy," Dane said to the dog. He looped the boat hook around the post to steady the skiff. The German shepherd's paws slipped slightly on the icy wood. Dane saw the tremor run through its legs, saw the muscles working past exhaustion. "Look at me." The dog did not. It kept looking toward the concrete outfall. Dane followed its gaze. The outfall was supposed to be sealed. Everyone knew that. It belonged to an older version of Bracken Cove, back when the town had believed any pipe that reached the tide could make a problem disappear. The concrete mouth sat above the winter waterline, capped by metal and crusted white with salt. Sunlight touched the rim. The water below it was clear enough to see dark stones. Too clear, some part of Dane thought. Then the skiff bumped the post and the dog's rear paws slid. "Hey!" Dane snapped, more sharply than he meant to. "Stay with me." This time the dog looked at him. Something passed between them. Not trust. Trust would have been too easy a word. Recognition, maybe. Two creatures both measuring whether the next move would make things worse. Dane reached slowly, clipped a lead around the old collar, and caught the dog against his chest as its strength finally gave way. The German shepherd was heavier than it looked, all wet fur and muscle and cold. It did not fight him. It folded into the skiff with a rough exhale and lay there shivering, still trying to lift its head toward the outfall. "Got him," Dane called, Maeve's shoulders lowered by half an inch. For Maeve, that counted as applause. Back at the service float, they wrapped the dog in a thermal blanket and carried him toward the harbor office. Halfway there, Dane noticed the collar tag. A small metal plate hung from cracked dark leather, worn nearly smooth by salt and time. He rubbed it with his thumb until a few letters came through. FTHM. Maeve leaned in. "That a name? Could be. Fathom?" The dog opened its eyes. Both of them went still. Dane looked down at the German shepherd. "Fathom," he said again. The dog did not wag its tail. It only held his gaze, exhausted and certain. Inside the harbor office, they put him near the heater. Maeve found towels. Dane found a bowl, then another, then a dented pan for food. Fathom drank, but only a little. He ignored the food entirely. "You're welcome," Dane said. The dog pushed himself up. "Absolutely not." Fathom stood on unsteady legs and moved toward the door. Maeve lifted her eyebrows. "He files complaints quickly. He nearly froze on a post. And yet." Dane opened the door only because stopping an exhausted German shepherd with a purpose felt less practical than following one. Fathom stepped into the clean brightness of the winter morning, crossed the packed snow, and headed straight for the southern edge of the harbor. Not toward North Star, not toward the road, toward the old concrete outfall. Dane followed with the lead loose in his hand. Maeve came behind them, silent now. At the rocks above the pipe, Fathom stopped. He lowered his nose to the snow, then to the iron cap, then to the stones near the water. He did not dig, he did not bark. He simply placed one large paw on the edge of the old concrete and looked down. The bay water below was clear, perfectly clear. Sunlight moved through it in cold silver bands. No oil sheen, no stain. No obvious wrongness. Only stones, tide, and winter brightness. Dane had spent years learning that danger rarely announced itself in the form a man preferred. Sometimes it shouted. Sometimes it leaked. Sometimes it put on a clean face and waited for tired people to call it safe. He looked at the sealed pipe, then at the dog. Fathom's amber eyes stayed fixed on the water, his body trembling under the blanket, not from fear now, but from refusal. The German shepherd was not wandering. He was not chasing trucks for sport. He was not asking for a home yet. He was guarding a place. Dane felt the old part of himself wake, the part that noticed patterns before permission arrived. He did not trust it. He did not dismiss it either. Behind them, North Star's steam rose into the bright winter air. Below them, the water remained impossibly clear, and Dane Ostrander, who had counted 37 steps to keep himself anchored to the present, stood beside a dog named Fathom and wondered what else in Bracken Cove had learned to hide in plain sight. Tessa Bellwether did not ask where Dane had found the dog until after she had warmed him. That was one of the reasons Bracken Cove trusted her. She put the living thing first, the story second. Her clinic sat 2 streets above the harbor, in a white clapboard building that had once been a bait shop. The waiting room smelled faintly of cedar chips, disinfectant, wet wool, and old coffee. A faded bell over the door rang whenever the wind pushed hard enough against the frame. Fathom lay on a thick towel beneath an exam table, wrapped in 2 warming blankets, his amber eyes following every movement in the room. He had accepted water. He had accepted heat. He had not accepted the idea that anyone was in charge. Tessa seemed to respect that. She was 49, compact and strong, with dark red hair tied high, and a face made warm by kindness, but sharpened by years of telling stubborn people what they did not want to hear. A deep burgundy parka hung open over green scrubs, and a red stethoscope rested around her neck like a warning. "He is not a stray in the usual sense," she said. Dane stood near the wall with his arms folded, careful not to crowd the dog. "Meaning? Meaning, look at him." Tessa lifted one of Fathom's paws with practiced gentleness. Pads worn but not neglected, nails not overgrown, teeth good, muscle tone excellent. Some small scrapes from the pier, mild cold stress, exhaustion, but nothing that says he has been wandering for weeks. Fathom's right ear tilted outward, the old scar at its base more visible now that the fur had begun to dry. "He listens," Tessa added. "Not like a pet waiting for treats, like a working dog waiting for the right word." Maeve Calloway stood beside the sink, hands tucked under her arms, her harbor master parka still dusted with melting snow. "That makes this simpler and worse." "Most things do," Dane said. Tessa slid a microchip scanner over Fathom's shoulders. The device gave a soft beep. Fathom lifted his head. "Easy," Dane said. The dog looked at him, then settled again. Tessa read the small screen. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for Dane to notice the pause before she spoke. "Registered name, Fathom Cade." Maeve turned from the sink. Dane looked down at the worn tag on the old dark collar. The letters they had guessed from salt and scratches had not been a guess after all. "Owner?" he asked. Tessa scrolled with her thumb. Dr. Rosalind Cade, Bracken Cove mailing address. Marine biology credentials listed through a coastal research program. She looked up. "That Rosalind Cade?" Maeve's mouth tightened. "Looks like." Dane remembered Rosalind in fragments rather than a full picture. A yellow field vest on cold mornings. Dark hair tucked under a knit cap, a hard plastic sample case bumping against her knee. Fathom beside her, harnessed, alert, patient. She used to appear at odd hours along the harbor edge, measuring, labeling, photographing, speaking into a recorder, while gulls screamed over the bait bins. People had called her intense. In Bracken Cove, that word could mean anything from brilliant to inconvenient. "She moved overseas," Maeve said, though her voice had already lost confidence in the sentence. "That was the word." "Where?" Tessa asked. "Norway. Bergen. Supposedly. Some research appointment." Fathom's eyes opened at the sound of Rosalind's name. Not joy. Not recognition in any simple, happy form. His body went still in a way that made the small room seem suddenly too loud. Dane saw it. So did Tessa. "He knows that name," she said quietly. Maeve pulled out her phone. "Then let's see if Bergen knows hers." No one spoke while Maeve stepped into the hall and made the call. Dane stayed near the wall. Fathom watched the door where Maeve had gone, breathing slow, saving strength. Dane did not like how much he understood that. There were names a body could hear before the mind had decided what to do with them. A name on a comm channel. A name written in a report. A name the world insisted was merely information when every nerve knew it was a room you had not finished leaving. Maeve returned 5 minutes later with the look she wore when a dock permit had turned into a legal problem. She was in communication with the Institute, Maeve said. There was interest, maybe an informal offer, but she never signed a contract, never reported for work, never started there. Tessa looked from Maeve to Dane. Fathom lowered his head onto his paws, but his eyes remained open. The little exam room settled into a silence that did not feel empty. It felt occupied by someone who was not there. Tessa broke it first. "Until Dr. Cade can be contacted. This dog needs a temporary placement," Maeve said. "Animal control is already getting pressure." "From North Star?" Maeve gave her a flat look. Tessa's jaw tightened. "Of course." Dane looked down at Fathom. "He can stay with me tonight." Tessa did not answer immediately. That bothered him more than a refusal would have. "What?" he asked. "You rescued him," she said. "That does not make him equipment. I know that. I'm saying it anyway." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If he worked environmental survey, he may react to things you and I do not understand. That does not mean you let him lead you into bad water, bad ground, or bad decisions. He is a living animal, not a test kit, not a warrant, not proof." Dane felt the words land harder than they should have, because she was right, because part of him had already looked at Fathom and seen direction. Not proof, maybe, but direction. "I'll keep him away from anything questionable," Dane said. Tessa studied him for one long second. "I am going to hold you to that." Fathom was allowed to leave with a temporary care form, antibiotics for the scrapes only if needed, and instructions Tessa repeated twice because she did not trust military men to hear medical advice the first time. By late afternoon, Dane had Fathom in the passenger side of his truck, wrapped in a blanket looking through the windshield toward the harbor with the solemn attention of a captain inspecting a poor crew. "You are not in charge," Dane said. Fathom did not blink. "That is not how this works." The dog gave a slow exhale through his nose. Dane drove uphill to the small harbor cottage assigned to rotating patrol staff, and unofficially to him because no one else wanted the wind exposure. The cottage stood above the water on a rocky slope, cedar shingles silvered by salt, windows facing the bay. In clear weather, the view was wide and almost cruel in its beauty. Inside, the place was spare. Iron stove, narrow bed, old table, 2 chairs, tide chart, radio, boots lined by the door. Dane had lived there long enough to know every sound the boards made after dark. Fathom entered slowly. He sniffed the threshold, the stove, Dane's boots, the coil of orange rescue line near the wall. Then he chose a place near the door where he could see Dane, the windows, and the road. Dane noticed. "Good tactical choice," he said. Fathom lowered himself with a tired groan. Dane heated broth, cut plain chicken into small pieces, and set water beside it. Fathom ate carefully, pausing every few bites to listen. He did not beg, he did not explore, he did not relax. That, too, Dane understood. At dusk the tide turned. The sound changed first. A deeper push beneath the pier pilings, a fuller knock against the rocks below the cottage. Dane had been washing the pan when his hands stopped in the water. The tide was coming in, not dangerous, not unusual. Nothing in the room changed. His body disagreed. He dried his hands too slowly, crossed to the wall clock, then checked the tide chart beside it. He already knew the time. Knowing had never stopped the need to verify. Fathom lifted his head from the blanket. Dane did not look at him. "Go back to sleep." The dog did not. Dane stood by the window while the bay darkened under winter blue. He counted the seconds between small impacts of water on stone. He hated that he did it. He did it anyway. Then, without sound, Fathom rose and moved across the room. He did not press against Dane's leg. He did not whine. He simply lay down between Dane and the door, facing the water-facing window, placing himself within Dane's sightline. Not comfort, coverage. Dane looked down at him. For the first time that day, the tightness in his chest shifted into something he did not have a name for. "Fine," he said softly. "You can keep that post." Fathom closed his eyes, but one ear remained angled toward the tide. The next morning, Cyrus Fenwick came to the harbor office wearing a navy-insulated work jacket with the North Star logo small over his heart. He carried no anger into the room. That was his skill. Cyrus brought concern the way other men brought legal papers. Maeve stood behind her desk. Dane leaned near the map wall. Fathom lay at Dane's left boot, on a short lead, awake but still. Cyrus looked at the dog first. "So that is the animal," he said. "His name is Fathom," Dane said. Cyrus smiled politely. He was 59, broad-faced, steel-gray hair combed back, skin flushed from the cold. His eyes were light blue and practiced. "I appreciate that he has a name. I am trying to prevent him from becoming a liability." Maeve said, "You made that clear on the phone. Then I failed to make clear enough why I called." Cyrus set his gloves on the edge of the desk. "We have drivers moving heavy vehicles over ice after midnight. We have workers coming off long shifts. We have contracts that keep this town breathing through February. If a loose dog causes a tanker accident, this becomes larger than hurt feelings. No one here is dismissing safety," Maeve said. "I hope not." Cyrus turned to Dane. "But I am hearing a second concern. I am hearing that people may be connecting this dog's behavior to our facility." Dane said nothing. Cyrus's voice softened, which somehow made it harder. "Mr. Ostrander, you served your country. People respect that. But respect does not mean the town can afford speculation. Seafood buyers are nervous creatures. A rumor about contamination can travel faster than facts, and facts do not always catch up before payroll comes due. There it was, not a threat. A burden placed neatly in the middle of the room. Fathom stood. The movement was small, but every person noticed. The dog did not growl. He did not lunge. He looked at Cyrus, then toward the window facing the truck road. Cyrus glanced down. For the first time his polite expression thinned. "See?" he said quietly. "That is exactly what concerns me." Dane shortened the lead with one hand. "He did not move toward you. He moved. So did you." Maeve's eyes flicked to Dane, warning without words. Cyrus put his gloves back on. "I am asking for responsible handling. Nothing more." "Then you'll get that," Maeve said. Cyrus nodded. "Good, because the alternative helps no one." After he left, the harbor office seemed colder. Maeve looked at Dane. "You poked him. He leaned on my service record without saying my service record." "I know. That is why I am telling you not to help him do it again." Dane looked down. Fathom was still facing the truck road. That night, Dane did not sleep. He told himself it was the tide. Then he told himself it was the dog. Neither explanation was honest enough. At 12:17 a.m., the first tanker passed below the cottage. Fathom opened his eyes but did not rise. At 12:43, a second truck passed. No reaction. At 1:06, a third engine approached. Lower and heavier. Before the headlights touched the window, Fathom was standing. His nose went to the crack beneath the door. His body tightened, tail low, ears forward. He did not bark. Dane froze with the pencil halfway across a blank page. The tanker rolled past, heading south. Fathom looked back at him, not pleading, expecting. Dane checked the tide chart. The tide had begun to fall 11 minutes earlier. He wrote it down. Time, direction, vehicle type, dog reaction, tide position. 2 more trucks passed before dawn. Fathom ignored one and reacted to the other. Dane wrote those down too. By morning, the notebook page looked less like obsession and more like the beginning of a pattern. That worried him more. Pattern was the word men used when instinct wanted permission to become certainty. He sat at the table after sunrise, pencil in hand, coffee cooling untouched. Fathom lay near the door, sleeping lightly, paws twitching once as a gull called outside. Dane looked at the entries again. Not every truck, not every sound, only certain tankers, only near the falling tide. He did not know whether he was following evidence or feeding the old machinery in his head. He had been wrong before. That was the part people forgot when they praised instincts. Instinct could save a life. It could also drag a man back into a room that no longer existed. Fathom opened one eye. Dane set the pencil down. For months, maybe years, his fear had pointed inward, toward memory, toward water, toward the exact shape of what he had failed to prevent. Now, for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, the fear seemed to be pointing outward, toward a road, toward a tide, toward a dog named for depth, sleeping by his door, as if waiting for the world to prove what he already knew. By the third morning, Dane's notebook had begun to look unreasonable. That bothered him more than the entries themselves. Time, direction, vehicle type, tide position, Fathom's reaction. He had written the same categories again and again in blocky print, careful enough to look official, private enough to feel like a confession. The pattern was there if a man wanted to see one. Certain tankers after midnight, southbound, near the falling tide. Fathom alert only for those, not the box trucks, not the bait suppliers, not the vans from the cold storage crew. A pattern could be evidence. It could also be a mirror. Dane had spent years distrusting mirrors. At 8 sharp, Maeve allowed him one field call that was not technically in the harbor budget, but was close enough to public safety that she could defend it without lying. Doctor. Celeste Arden arrived from the State Environmental Office in a white-gray waterproof coat, black field pants, and rubber boots so clean they looked mildly offended by the harbor. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was tucked into a low knot. She carried a hard plastic sampling kit in one hand and an expression that suggested she had never met a rumor she wanted to encourage. "This is the dog?" she asked, looking at Fathom. Fathom stood beside Dane's left leg, harnessed but calm. Tessa Bellwether had insisted on coming, and she stood close enough to the German shepherd to make her position clear. Fathom was not equipment. He was there because he refused to be left behind, and because Dane had promised to keep him away from anything questionable. "His name is Fathom," Tessa said. Celeste gave a small nod, not unkindly. "Then Fathom can observe from a safe distance." "I like her," Tessa said. Dane did not answer. They started at the official North Star outfall. The facility looked awake and ordinary in the cold light. Steam rose from vents. Workers crossed between doors in insulated jackets. Pallets moved. Trucks idled. Nothing about the place announced danger. That was what unsettled Dane most. He had been trained to respect obvious hazards, but the world had a talent for hiding its worst choices behind regular operations and good signage. Celeste unpacked with ceremonial precision: bottle, label, gloves, time, temperature, location, chain of custody form. She read every code aloud before sealing the samples, her voice flat and steady. Dane watched the water pour into the first bottle. It was clear. Then they moved to the old concrete pipe south of the harbor, the one Fathom had stared at since Dane pulled him from the abandoned pier. The pipe looked even less suspicious in daylight. Its capped mouth was crusted with salt. Snow had gathered along the iron rim. Beneath it, the bay lay bright and transparent over dark stones. A person could have stood there and felt foolish for worrying. Fathom did not. He stood 10 feet back as Tessa required, his ears forward, his body rigid but controlled. He made no sound. That quiet was harder on Dane than barking would have been. Celeste took her samples. Again the water looked clean. She noticed Dane watching and capped the bottle. "Water can look clear and still be unsafe," she said. "But clear water also does not prove wrongdoing. Neither does a dog's reaction." "I know." "Do you?" Dane looked at her. Celeste did not soften. "I am not here to insult your instincts, Mr. Ostrander. I am here because instincts cannot be cross-examined. If this becomes anything, it will need time, source, pathway, repeatability, and documentation. Not suspicion, not a good story. Documentation." Maeve made a small approving sound from behind them. Dane looked down at Fathom. "Everyone's a poet today." Fathom kept staring at the pipe. The preliminary results came that afternoon. Clean. Both sites. No clear sign of a discharge violation, no obvious exceedance, nothing that justified formal action. Celeste delivered the news in Maeve's office with the same calm she had used to label bottles. She did not seem pleased to be right. That kept Dane from disliking her. "Could timing matter?" Maeve asked. "Timing always matters," Celeste said. "But that does not mean timing explains this. It means we have a clean result at the sampled locations during the sampled window." Dane heard the careful wording. Maeve did too. "Not innocent," Dane said. Celeste looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "Not guilty either." The room held there. Outside the harbor office window, North Star's loading bay opened for another truck. A man in a blue jacket waved it through. The town kept moving. Jobs did not pause because one dog disliked the smell of certain nights. Dane folded his notebook closed. For a moment, he wanted to apologize to everyone, to Maeve, to Celeste, to Tessa, even to Fathom, not because he was certain he had been wrong, but because uncertainty itself felt like damage. Men like Cyrus Fenwick did not need Dane to be proven unstable. They only needed him to be seen reaching too far. Then Nola Vickers came by with a basket of knitted hats for the harbor crew, and a notebook she did not mention until the hats had been accepted. Nola was 61, short and steady, with warm brown skin, sharp eyes, and silver curls wrapped in a teal scarf. She worked part-time at the local urgent care desk and somehow knew every family history in Bracken Cove without ever appearing nosy. People told Nola things because Nola had a way of listening as if the smallest complaint deserved a chair. She waited until Celeste left to pack her truck before setting the notebook on Maeve's desk. "I'm not making a claim," Nola said. Maeve looked at the teal cloth cover. "That's never a good opening. It's an honest one." Dane stood by the map wall. Fathom lay near the door, head raised. Nola opened the book. The pages were filled with dates, names or initials, work locations, weather notes, and short descriptions written in careful script. Scratchy throat after night shift. Eyes burning after South Dock unload. Chest tight after pulling traps near lower channel. Smell described as sharp, bleach metal, low tide. All adults, Nola said before anyone asked. Workers, boat hands, drivers, 2 mechanics, 1 freezer supervisor. I'm not diagnosing cause. I don't have the tests for that. But I know repetition when it keeps walking and wearing different boots. Dane moved closer. Some entries had arrows in the margin. Tide falling. Wind south. Fog. After midnight. Nola tapped one line with a blunt finger. I don't know what they breathed. I know they all worked near water on nights when people complained about a strange smell, and then decided not to complain too loudly because strange smells don't pay rent. The sentence changed the room, not like evidence, like permission to keep asking. Maeve closed the notebook gently, as if it were not fragile but deserved respect. Can Celeste see this? Nola's eyes shifted to Dane. Only if no one turns my people into a headline before anyone knows what is true. No headlines, Dane said. You don't control that. No, but I can control my part. Nola studied him for a moment. Good, because Bracken Cove has survived a lot of men who wanted to save it loudly. After she left, Dane could still see the arrows in the margins. Falling tide, south wind, after midnight. That evening, he went to find Alden Pierce. The captain of the Mercy Gale was exactly where Dane expected, on the deck of his lobster boat, arguing with a frozen pulley as if the pulley had insulted his mother. Alden was 58, thick through the shoulders, weather-burned, with pale blue eyes and a white stubble beard that looked maintained by accident. His yellow rain bib was stiff with salt, and his faded cap read Murky Gal in letters nearly worn smooth. You hear about North Star? Alden asked, without greeting. I'm here about water. Same thing lately. Dane stepped onto the dock, but not the boat. That line mattered to men like Alden. You ever notice a chemical smell near the South Channel? Alden laughed once without humor. You know what this harbor smells like? Diesel, bait, old rope, fish guts, coffee, and men lying about weather. Pick one. Nola has notes. Nola has a heart bigger than her filing cabinet. She has dates. Alden stopped working. For a moment, Dane thought he had reached him. Then Alden turned, and the anger in his face had nothing careless in it. It was old anger. Protective anger. You think folks here don't know something's off sometimes, Alden said. We know. We also know what happens when people from outside hear one scary word and stop buying from all of us. Not North Star alone. All of us. Lobster prices drop, contracts freeze, tourists whisper, and the men who made the mess hire lawyers while deckhands miss mortgage payments. I'm not trying to hurt the town. That is exactly what every man says right before the town gets hurt. Dane absorbed it. Alden looked past him toward North Star, where lights were coming on in the early dark. You want a villain. Pick someone rich enough to survive being right or wrong. Most of us don't have that kind of character. Dane could have pushed harder. Instead, he nodded. That irritated Alden more than an argument. What, no speech? The captain asked. No. Good. I hate speeches. Dane turned to leave. Alden's voice followed him, quieter now. South Channel smells wrong after certain nights. Not always. Not enough to prove anything, and not enough that I want my name attached to it. Dane looked back. Alden had returned to the pulley. That's all you get, the captain said. For now. It was enough. The next piece came because Fathom refused to move from a storage shed. The old buoy shed sat behind the harbor office, a drafty structure full of retired floats, cracked life rings, faded markers, spare rope, and the kind of municipal clutter no one threw away because it might become useful during a storm. Maeve had ordered a clean-out before winter got worse. 2 seasonal workers were dragging old gear into a pile when Fathom planted himself in front of a faded orange life ring and would not budge. Tessa, who had arrived to check his paws, pointed at Dane before he could speak. No guessing, no tearing, no letting him chew anything. I was going to say hello to the buoy. You were going to do that face. Maeve looked from Dane to Tessa. He does have a face. Dane crouched beside Fathom. The dog's nose hovered over the life ring. His body was still, but his breathing had changed. Not panic, recognition. The ring was old, the orange faded nearly white, its rope stiff and salt-hardened. Someone had written property of coastal survey in black marker years ago. Dane saw a seam in the cracked foam where it had been repaired. Maeve fetched gloves and a utility knife. Tessa kept one hand lightly on Fathom's harness. They opened the life ring slowly on a clean tarp, with Maeve photographing each step on her phone. because by now everyone in the room understood that procedure was not an inconvenience. It was the only way a strange discovery survived contact with powerful people. Inside the hollowed foam, wrapped in plastic and sealed with marine tape, was a small field journal. The cover was green. The elastic band had lost its snap. On the first page, written in silver ink, was a name: Rosalind Cade. Fathom lowered his head until his nose touched the tarp beside the journal. He did not paw at it. He did not whine. He simply lay down, as if after many months the thing he had been guarding had finally been placed where humans could see it. Dane felt the back of his throat tighten. Not because the journal proved anything yet, because it meant Rosalind had expected not to be heard. Maeve opened the book carefully. There were no dramatic accusations, no confession, no page that said North Star had done anything wrong. Just numbers, tide marks, wind directions, water temperatures, salinity readings, license plates written without comment, and repeated references to T14. Then one sentence, underlined twice: do not sample where the permit tells you to sample. Dane read it again. Celeste's voice echoed in memory. Time, source, pathway, repeatability, documentation. Rosalind had been building those things before she vanished from the town's daily rhythm. Not loudly, not recklessly, carefully. That night, Dane spread his own notebook beside Rosalind's journal on the cottage table. Fathom lay by the door, half asleep. Outside, the harbor settled under clean winter starlight. North Star's lights burned at the far end of the water. Dane compared times. Tanker southbound, 1:06 a.m. falling tide. Rosalind entry, faint sharp odor, South Road, falling tide. Tanker southbound, 2:14 a.m. falling tide. Rosalind entry. T14, check old cannery map. Dane sat back. The trucks Fathom reacted to were not returning to North Star after the late runs. They were going south, not toward the official outfall, not toward the main plant, toward the dark stretch beyond the lower channel, where the old fish cannery had been shut down so long that most of Bracken Cove spoke of it in the past tense, like a building could become a ghost if enough people stopped needing it. Fathom opened his eyes. Dane looked at the notebook, then at the tide chart, then toward the southern road beyond the window. For the first time, the clean samples no longer felt like failure. They felt like directions. Someone had been teaching the town to look in the wrong place. The old cannery sat 8 miles south of Bracken Cove, though distance was not what made it feel separate. It had been abandoned long enough for people to stop arguing about who had ruined it. The building crouched beside a narrow inlet where winter ice gathered in dull plates, and the spruce trees leaned away from the wind. Rust had eaten the fence in long orange scars. A faded sign near the gate still promised premium packed seafood, though half the letters had peeled away and the windows behind it were dark. Dane parked on the public road with 2 tires in dirty snow and 2 on frozen gravel. He did not cross the fence. That was Maeve's first rule, and she had repeated it in the tone she used for people who thought good intentions made trespass invisible. Public road, she said from the passenger seat. Public shoulder. Public records. Public patience. Dane looked through the windshield at the cannery. That last one sounds made up. It is. I made it up because you're short on it. In the back seat, Fathom stood with his front paws braced on the rubber floor mat, nose lifted toward the cracked windows of the old building. He had not barked once during the drive. That silence felt deliberate. Tessa had kept his harness loose, and one hand near the lead, ready to stop him from pushing too far toward anything unknown. Celeste Arden arrived 10 minutes later in a state vehicle that looked too clean for the road. She carried a tablet, a folder of printed maps, and the same controlled skepticism she had brought to the water samples. If she had been discouraged by the clean results, she did not show it. Celeste seemed built for the part of truth that happened after disappointment. Maeve filmed from the roadside. Dane photographed the gate, the tire marks near the entrance, the old loading ramp, and the inlet beyond the building. None of it proved anything. A building existed, a road had been used, a fence had rusted. Tanker tracks in snow could belong to 100 ordinary explanations if a lawyer was paid enough to name them. A white tanker appeared at 10:42 a.m. Dane heard it before he saw it, the low diesel note traveling through the trees. The truck rolled down the narrow service road, slowed at the cannery gate, then pulled around toward a side-access lane half hidden by snowbanks. The logo on the cab did not say North Star. It read Keelan Coastal Logistics in dark blue letters, with a stylized wave underneath. Fathom's body tightened. Tessa touched the harness. "Stay." Fathom stayed. Dane raised the camera and recorded the truck from the public road. Maeve did the same. Celeste wrote the time down. The tanker disappeared behind the cannery wall. No one said anything until the engine cut off. Maeve lowered her phone. "That is not North Star." "No," Dane said. Celeste looked at the license plate image on her tablet. "Independent carrier." "Independent on paper," Dane said. Celeste's eyes moved to him. "On paper is where most investigations begin and many of them end." They did not wait to see more. Maeve would not allow it, and Celeste agreed. The goal was documentation, not drama. They left the cannery without one person jumping a fence, touching a gate, or giving Cyrus Fenwick the gift of an easy complaint. Back at the harbor office, the day became paper. Land records, business filings, old stormwater maps, his historic infrastructure permits, county archives, shell companies with clean names and cloudy purposes. Celeste sat up at Maeve's conference table and worked through records with the chilly focus of a surgeon. Maeve made calls to the county clerk and got transferred enough times to make her voice dangerous. Dane stood at the map wall, pinning copies of Rosalind's journal entries beside his own notes. Fathom lay near the door, restless but quiet, one ear angled toward the truck road beyond the office. By late afternoon, the picture had grown clearer and less useful. The cannery property was owned by Harpswell Winter Holdings, a company registered 3 years earlier to an address in Portland. Harpswell Winter Holdings leased industrial storage rights to another company that had no North Star name on it. Keelan Coastal Logistics operated the tankers. The listed cargo category was non-hazardous processing rinse. Celeste read the phrase from the filing and did not bother hiding her distaste. "That is an impressively soft description." Maeve leaned over the paper. "Is it false?" "Not from the words alone." Dane looked at the map. "So North Star's plant test's clean. The trucks aren't theirs. The cannery isn't theirs. The cargo is labeled harmless." "Correct," Celeste said. Maeve heard the change in his voice before he did. "Dane." He did not look at her. There it was, the floor dropping out beneath the shape he had built in his mind. Clean samples, clean ownership, clean labels. If he took this to the town now, Cyrus would not have to bury him. Dane would bury himself. A former combat diver with sleep trouble, a dog with strange habits, a notebook full of midnight guesses, and a theory that fell apart whenever paperwork touched it. He could already hear the words people would use. Concerned, overextended, haunted. They would not need to call him unstable. They could say it kindly and do more damage. Fathom rose and came to him. The German shepherd did not lean hard. He only stood beside Dane's leg and lowered his head, as if taking a post rather than offering comfort. Dane looked down. "You do not get to be certain just because I want you to be," he said quietly. Fathom's amber eyes lifted. The dog did not understand evidence. He did not understand shell companies or cargo codes. He knew scent, routine, waiting, absence. Dane had to know the rest. That was the unfairness of being human. You had to turn what you felt into something strong enough to survive people who did not feel it. Celeste, who had been studying Rosalind's journal without speaking, suddenly pulled one of the county maps closer. What did she mean by T14? Dane looked up. "We thought it might be a sample designation." Celeste shook her head slowly. "No, not the way she uses it." She laid Rosalind's journal beside an old infrastructure map of the southern inlet. The map was yellowed and poorly scanned, printed from a county archive that looked as if it had been digitized by someone with a grudge against clarity. Lines ran beneath the old cannery, toward the inlet, then north along the contour of the shoreline. Celeste tapped one faded label, T14. Maeve leaned closer. "Drainage? Industrial tide line," Celeste said. "Late 80s, early 90s. It looks like a transfer and discharge route connected to the cannery's old processing system." Dane stared at the map. The line ran from beneath the cannery, through buried infrastructure and out toward the coast. Celeste followed it with one finger. "It does not end at the inlet," she said. Maeve reached for another map. Dane already knew before the 2 pages aligned. The line curved toward Bracken Cove, toward the old concrete outfall south of the harbor. the place Fathom had guarded. For a moment, no one moved. Outside, a truck passed the harbor office. Ordinary and loud. Inside, the old map made the room feel smaller. Celeste sat back. Her voice was careful now, but underneath the caution was something harder. If this map is accurate, then someone using the old cannery infrastructure might move material through T-14 and release it near the harbor without ever touching North Star's current permitted outfall. Maeve's face had gone still. Dane looked from the map to Rosalind's journal, the tide notes, the license plates, the phrase underlined twice. Do not sample where the permit tells you to sample. Not a warning written for drama, an instruction. Dane felt shame before relief. He had been thinking like a man staring at a locked door. Rosalind had been thinking like water. The clean samples were not failure, they were misdirection. Celeste held up a hand before Dane could speak. This is a possible pathway. Not proof of use, not proof of source, not proof of North Star control. But it explains the timing, Dane said. It may explain the timing, the falling tide. Possibly. Fathom reacting to certain tankers. Celeste glanced at the dog. Possibly. Maeve said, and the smell appearing for a few hours, then vanishing. Celeste exhaled. Possibly. Dane almost smiled. You hate that word? I respect that word. That is different. They worked until the office windows turned dark and the harbor lights came on one by one. With the maps aligned, the notes began to behave differently. Rosalind had recorded odor on nights of falling tide. Dane had recorded Fathom's alert posture at similar windows. Tanker sightings matched the southbound route. Nola's notebook entries clustered around the same weather patterns. None of it was enough. All of it was no longer nothing. Maeve ordered takeout from the diner and forgot to eat hers. Celeste built a timeline on the whiteboard. Dane redrew the T-14 line twice, each time finding the same path from the abandoned cannery to the old outfall. The mechanism slowly emerged, not as a lightning strike, but as a cold machine assembled piece by piece. North Star could keep its permitted outfall clean. Material that was expensive or inconvenient to process could be collected after sanitation cycles, labeled as processing rinse, hauled by an outside carrier, sent to the old cannery, diluted in an underground holding system, then moved through T-14 when the tide would carry it away. A clean plant, a dirty route, a town trained to test the wrong mouth of the pipe. Dane pushed back from the table. Maeve pointed at him before he said anything. No, I didn't say anything. You stood up like a bad idea putting on boots. We need a direct sample from the cannery system. We need a warrant, a state order, consent, or another lawful path, Maeve said. Pick one that does not involve you becoming Cyrus Fenwick's favorite headline. Dane looked at Celeste. Celeste did not rescue him. She is right. If you obtain something improperly, it can damage the entire inquiry before it begins. People may be breathing this. Then do not make yourself the reason no one can prove it. The words landed. Hard. Fair. Dane sat back down. At 9:18 p.m., Merritt Shaw called Maeve's office line and asked for Dane by name. Maeve put the call on speaker only after asking permission. The voice that came through was male, quiet, and so tense it seemed to stand on tiptoe. I work at North County Analytical, he said. My name is Merritt Shaw. Celeste's eyes sharpened. Dane leaned toward the phone. You processed water samples? Some, not all. I'm not saying I know anything complete. No one's asking you to. That's not true, Merritt said, and the small honesty in it made the room go silent. People are always asking, just not out loud. He agreed to meet them in the parking lot behind the closed library, under the security camera, because fear did not make him careless. Merritt arrived in an old gray sedan with a cracked bumper. He was 38, thin, pale from lab light and winter, with messy ash-blonde hair flattened under a black beanie. He held a folder against his chest like it might leave without him. His eyes kept moving from Maeve to Dane to Celeste, then to the street behind them. I can't give you the logs, he said before anyone asked. Not yet. Celeste's voice softened by 1 degree. What can you tell us? Merritt swallowed. Some samples tied to the lower channel were flagged as transport anomaly. Conductivity off. Preservative notes inconsistent. Chain paperwork weird. Weird how? Celeste asked. Too clean after correction. He looked ashamed of the sentence. I wrote a note. My supervisor told me the container issue explained it and marked the final within normal range. Dane said, when? Merritt opened the folder just enough to show photocopied dates, not full records. His finger trembled slightly. Same months, Rosalind Cade kept calling about retests. At Rosalind's name, Fathom stepped forward from beside Dane. Merritt flinched. "He won't hurt you," Dane said. "I know." Merritt looked at the dog's worn collar. She used to bring him by the lab entrance. She'd make him sit outside the line because she said clean work starts before the door. Fathom stood very still. Merritt's face changed. Fear remained, but another feeling moved through it. Regret, maybe. Recognition. "I thought she was being difficult," Merritt said. Then she stopped calling, and everyone acted relieved. He closed the folder. "I'm not brave," he said. Maeve answered before Dane could. "Good. Brave people get dramatic and sloppy. Careful people last longer." Merritt gave a shaky laugh that was not really a laugh. "I need time," he said. "If I hand over logs without protection, I lose my certification. Maybe worse. But you're not imagining it. Something was wrong with the way some samples were handled. He left them with dates, initials, and enough fear to prove he had more." Back at the cottage near midnight, Dane sat with Rosalind's journal, the T-14 map, Merritt's dates, and his own notes spread across the table. Fathom lay by the door, not asleep. The tide was rising now, and Dane had not checked the chart in almost 20 minutes. That should have felt like progress. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a pier in fog. The old reflex whispered its simple answer. Go. Find the pipe. Find the tank. Take the sample. End the waiting. Dane looked toward the closet, where his old dive bag sat behind winter gear. Fathom lifted his head. Dane stayed seated. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the phone instead. Roman Halberg answered on the fourth ring. His voice sounded awake in the way certain investigators always sounded awake, as if sleep had never been fully trusted. Dane gave him the short version. Clean samples. T-14. Old cannery. Tanker route. Merritt Shaw. Rosalind Cade missing from the story everyone had accepted. When he finished, Roman did not praise him. He did not promise action. He did not offer outrage. He asked, "What have you touched?" Dane looked at the maps. "Nothing we weren't supposed to." A pause. "Keep it that way," Roman said. "If you want this to survive outside your head, from now on do not touch anything like a soldier. Touch it like a witness." Dane looked down at Fathom. The German shepherd had settled his head on his paws again, eyes still open, holding the room the way he held the edge of water, patient, watchful, unwilling to leave. "All right," Dane said. Outside, the tide kept rising. For once, Dane let it. Roman Halberg opened a preliminary inquiry and immediately made it feel smaller than hope. He did not arrive with a team. He did not issue orders that made bad men panic or good people cheer. He asked for copies. He asked for dates. He asked who had touched what, who had witnessed what, and whether any item had been moved before being photographed. Dane understood the reason. He hated the pace anyway. The old part of him wanted movement. If a route existed beneath the town, if tankers were using an abandoned cannery, if Rosalind Cade had hidden notes because she expected no one to listen, then waiting felt like surrender wearing a clean shirt. Roman did not care how waiting felt. Photograph from public access, he told them over the phone. Document contact attempts. Preserve originals. Do not confront drivers. Do not enter private property. Do not collect materials from restricted areas. If Merritt Shaw provides anything, date it, copy it, and keep the original chain clear. Maeve, standing beside the harbor office desk with one hand around a cooling coffee, nodded as though Roman could see her. "You hear that, Ostrander?" "I hear it." "You's listening?" Dane looked at Fathom, who lay near the office door, eyes open. Unfortunately, Celeste Arden built a system around the frustration. She numbered everything. Dane's photos went into one folder. Maeve's road footage went into another. Rosalind's journal was placed in a protective sleeve and logged as found inside a retired survey life ring, with Maeve and Tessa as witnesses. Merritt's partial dates were recorded as unverified leads, not evidence. Dane had spent much of his life trusting trained reaction. Now he was being asked to trust labels, timestamps, and patience. It felt like trying to hold back weather with paper. By Thursday evening, Cyrus Fenwick changed the weather. He did it from the front of the harbor hall. The meeting was called a community safety discussion, which meant everyone knew what it was really about before stepping through the door. The harbor hall smelled of wet coats, old varnish, coffee urns, and the salt that seemed to live in every public building in Bracken Cove. Folding chairs filled quickly. North Star workers came in insulated jackets with the company logo. Lobster crews stood along the walls. A few shop owners took seats near the back, trying to look neutral and failing. Dane sat on the aisle with Maeve to his left and Fathom at his feet. Tessa had insisted on attending, partly as Fathom's advocate and partly, Dane suspected, because she wanted to glare professionally at anyone who called the dog dangerous. Cyrus stood at the front in a gray wool coat over a white shirt, hands folded around a stack of notes he never truly needed. He looked tired in a way that played well in winter towns. Not weak, burdened. "I am not here to attack anyone," Cyrus began. Dane almost smiled. The best traps always introduced themselves as restraint. Cyrus spoke about ice on the tanker road, about drivers braking hard near the South Bend, about workers leaving late shifts in the dark, about contracts already under review because buyers heard rumors before anyone had facts. He mentioned taxes, payroll, repairs to the volunteer firehouse. The school roof fund was not mentioned because there were no children in this story's room, but everyone understood the shape of civic dependence. Then he said Dane's name, not harshly. That was the craft of it. "Mr. Ostrander has served this country and this harbor with seriousness," Cyrus said. "No one questions that. But seriousness is not the same as proof. Concern is not the same as cause. And in a town like ours, an unverified concern can become a financial event before it becomes a finding." Dane felt people turn slightly toward him without looking directly. Fathom shifted under the chair. Maeve's voice was low. "Stay seated. I am seated. Stay seated inside your face, too." Dane exhaled through his nose. Cyrus continued, gentle and firm. "North Star has complied with its permits. The current outfall has tested within accepted limits. Our vehicles are operated by trained drivers. We use outside carriers, as many companies do, and every shipment is documented. If there are questions, we welcome proper review. What we cannot welcome is speculation that endangers 160 adult workers in the middle of a Maine winter." A murmur moved through the hall. It was not applause. Worse, it was agreement mixed with fear. Alden Pierce stood before the moderator could decide whether to allow questions. The captain of the Mercy Gale kept his old cap in both hands, turning the brim slowly. His weathered face looked harder under fluorescent lights, the lines deeper, the blue of his eyes pale as cold water. "I got a question for Dane," Alden said. The hall quieted. Dane looked up. Alden did not sound angry now. That made it harder. "Say you're right. Say something's wrong and North Star gets shut down while investigators take their sweet time. Who pays my crew when buyers pull back? Who pays the freezer men? Who pays the mechanics? Who pays the drivers who never signed up to be part of anybody's scandal?" Dane held his gaze. Alden's jaw flexed. "And say you're wrong. Say this is a dog remembering something, and you reading your old ghost into tanker headlights. Who pays for what you break then?" No one spoke. The question did not feel like an attack. It felt like the center of the town finally saying its fear out loud. Dane wanted to answer with truth. He had none big enough. So he gave the only honest thing he had. "I do not know," he said. Alden looked disappointed but not surprised. Cyrus lowered his eyes as if saddened by Dane's lack of reassurance. That small performance did more damage than any accusation would have. The meeting ended without a vote, without a fight, without one clear line between sides. That was the worst part. People did not leave thinking Dane was bad. They left needing him to be mistaken. Outside, snow had begun again, fine and dry under the streetlights. Tessa crouched to check Fathom's paws, though nothing was wrong with them. "You did fine," she said. Dane watched Cyrus across the parking lot, speaking with 2 plant supervisors and a town council member. Fine does not feel useful. Useful is overrated when people want simple. Maeve came up beside him. "Tomorrow morning we hand Roman the copies. Tonight you sleep." Dane looked at her. Maeve sighed. "Tonight you attempt sleep in the same building as a bed." Better? Better. But sleep never got its chance. The small storage room beside Dane's cottage had no reason to look different at first. The padlock still hung in place. The door was closed. Snow along the threshold had been disturbed, but wind could do that. Animals could do that. A man could stand there and decide not to see what his body already knew. Fathom knew before Dane touched the latch. The dog stopped 3 steps away, head low, not growling, not pulling, only still. Dane turned on his flashlight. The lock had been opened and reset. Inside, nothing appeared stolen. The shelf still held spare line, old gloves, charts, a toolbox, and the small cooler containing Dane's personal comparison samples. The copies of Rosalind's journal were still in their envelope. His notebook sat exactly where he had left it. 2 exactly. Maeve arrived 10 minutes later. Celeste came 20 after that, hair still damp from being pulled too quickly under a winter hat. Nobody touched the samples until Celeste photographed the shelf, the cooler, the caps, the labels, and the room from every angle. Then she opened one bottle. She did not need a full test to know. Her face changed first. Dane felt the answer before she said it. "This is not what you collected." Maeve swore once quietly. Celeste held the bottle up to the light. "It appears to have been replaced with clean water." "They left everything," Dane said. "Yes," Celeste replied. Because the samples were not the target. He understood. The target was him. By morning, North Star's formal complaint had reached the town office, animal control, and Maeve's desk. Attached was security footage from near the cannery road. The angle showed Dane's truck and then Dane walking along the snowy shoulder. The camera cut off before the fence line became clear. The image did not show him entering private property. It did not need to. It showed enough for people who wanted a shape. The complaint alleged improper surveillance, interference with vehicle operations, and use of an uncontrolled dog to intimidate drivers. Fathom was named as a safety concern. Animal Control scheduled a behavioral evaluation pending review. Maeve received instructions from the town manager to place Dane on temporary administrative leave from patrol duties until the matter was clarified. The words were clean: administrative, pending, clarified. Dane read them in Maeve's office, with Fathom pressed against his boot. Maeve looked angrier than he had ever seen her, which meant her voice became very calm. "This is temporary." Dane folded the paper once. "Everything that damages a man starts temporary. That is not helpful. No. Then do not say it like wisdom." He looked at Fathom. The dog's right ear tilted outward, the little scar visible near the base. He did not understand paperwork, but he understood tone. He understood the way people looked at a creature when they had already decided it might be a problem. Tessa arrived before noon with a folder of vaccination records, medical notes, and a statement that Fathom had shown no aggressive behavior in her care. "This complaint is garbage," she said. Maeve looked at her. "Your professional terminology is inspiring. My professional terminology is longer." I shortened it for the room. Dane appreciated them. That did not stop the pressure from closing around his ribs. By dusk, he was back at the cottage on administrative leave, which felt like being told to stand outside his own life. The tide was rising. He checked the clock once, then again. The old dive bag sat in the closet behind winter gear. He had not opened it in months, maybe longer. The canvas was dark and stiff at the seams. Inside were the pieces of a man he had once been able to become quickly. Hood, gloves, light, old slate, backup knife, folded checklists, the wrist compass he had kept though he no longer trusted himself underwater. He set the bag on the floor. Fathom stood. Dane did not look at him. No. The German shepherd moved between him and the bag. Not fast, not dramatic. He simply occupied the space. Dane reached to lift the bag. Fathom placed one paw on the canvas. "Move." Fathom did not. The command came out too much like the old voice, the one that expected obedience because fear had no time for discussion. Dane heard it and stopped. For a long moment, the room held the sound of the incoming tide below the hill. Water pressing into rocks, water filling space, water finding every low place. He saw the old chamber again, not clearly. Memory did not need clarity to be cruel. He saw instrument lights, heard a breath hitch on the comm, remembered believing, with the arrogance of training and youth and competence, that if he stayed sharp enough, he could solve every failing system by force of will. His teammate had lived, but not as the man who entered the water. Dane had carried that fact like a stone and called it discipline. Now he looked at Fathom's paw on the dive bag. This dog had waited for a woman people had explained away. He had guarded pipes and roads and a life ring because no one else had understood the language available to him. And still, when Dane reached for the old shape of a bad decision, Fathom did not follow. He blocked the door back into it. Dane slowly let go of the strap. His hands were shaking. He hated that. He let them. Fathom lifted his paw from the canvas but did not move away. Dane sat on the floor beside the bag. The tide kept rising. The room did not flood. No voice crackled in his ear. No one was asking him to be faster than fear. He picked up his phone and called Roman first. "I need you to know someone accessed my storage room," Dane said. "Samples were replaced. Copies are intact. Celeste documented it." Roman was silent for 2 seconds. "Good. Do not touch the room further. Send the photographs. We will treat the sample issue as possible tampering with privately held comparison materials, not as primary evidence." Dane closed his eyes briefly. Not primary evidence. The case had not died in that storage room. Then he called Maeve. She answered with, "If this is you telling me you are standing near the cannery, I will personally make retirement look merciful. I am at the cottage." "Good. I had the dive bag out." Silence. Then Maeve said, softer, "Had?" Dane looked at Fathom. "Had," he said. "I put it down." Maeve let out a breath he could hear. "What do you need?" Dane stared at the bag, then at the tide chart, then at the dog standing guard over the thing he had almost become again. "I need people around me until I stop wanting to fix this alone," he said. Maeve did not make a joke. That told him he had said something true. "I'm on my way," she said. After the call ended, Dane remained on the floor. Fathom came closer and lowered himself beside him, not touching, but near enough that Dane could feel the warmth of another living body. Outside, North Star's lights glowed through the winter dark. Inside, the dive bag stayed closed. For the first time since this had begun, Dane understood that patience was not the absence of courage. Sometimes patience was the only way courage survived long enough to matter. Roman Hallberg came to Bracken Cove without sirens, speeches, or the kind of urgency people imagined when they wanted the government to arrive and make a hard thing simple. He came in a dark federal vehicle with road salt crusted along the doors, carrying a black notebook, a thin laptop bag, and a patience that made Dane feel both grateful and accused. At the harbor office, Roman spread the pieces across Maeve's conference table. Merritt Shaw's partial dates, Keelan Coastal Logistics route references, Harpswell Winter Holdings property filings, Rosalind Cade's journal, Dane's photographs from the public road, and Maeve's notes on the old T-14 infrastructure. He was 51, lean, clean-shaven, with close-cropped salt and black hair and eyes that made no promise to believe anyone. He listened the way some men searched rooms, not for drama, but for what had been left out. "This does not get us into the cannery yet," Roman said. Dane stood near the wall with Fathom beside him. "Then why are you here?" Roman looked up. "Because it may get us to someone who can." He turned the laptop toward them. On the screen was a sequence of payments tied to a law firm in Portland, one that had represented North Star Marine Foods during permit reviews and contract disputes. The firm had been paying for a winter apartment in Harriwick, a small town 30 miles inland, where summer rentals became quiet, cheap rooms once the tourists left. Maeve leaned closer. "Who lives there?" Roman did not answer immediately. Instead, he clicked to another document. A utility setup, a delivery authorization, a building access note. The listed occupant was not Rosalind Cade, but the emergency contact line had once contained an email address Dane recognized from the first page of Rosalind's field journal. rcade.coastal. Fathom stood. Nobody moved for a moment. The German shepherd's ears came forward, his body still but suddenly filled with a pressure Dane could feel through the leash. Roman watched him. "He knows something." "He knows her name," Dane said. Roman closed the laptop. "Then we verify quietly." Harriwick looked too ordinary for what it held. That was the first thing Dane noticed. No rusted warehouse. No guarded gate. No locked room at the end of a road. The apartment building stood above a closed seasonal gift shop on a side street dusted with new snow. A wreath hung on the downstairs door. A row of mailboxes tilted slightly under a porch light. Across the street, someone had shoveled a careful path to a bakery that would not open until spring. A place like that did not look like a trap. That made it worse. Roman went first, with Maeve beside him. Dane followed with Fathom on a short lead. Tessa had come too, not because anyone expected danger from the apartment, but because she had said, with complete finality, that if Fathom was about to meet the woman whose absence had shaped his every step, A veterinarian was going to be there to watch the dog, not the case. Roman knocked. The silence behind the door lasted just long enough to become painful. Then a woman's voice said, "Who is it?" "Roman Hallberg, Federal Environmental Investigator." "Dr. Cade, we need to speak with you." "Nothing." Fathom made a sound then, not a bark, not a whine. A low breath that broke halfway through, as if the body had found a scent the heart had not been allowed to trust. Inside, something dropped softly to the floor. The door opened 4 inches. Rosalind Cade stood in the gap wearing a cream turtleneck, gray cardigan, and dark jeans. She was thinner than Dane remembered, her brown hair tied low, several loose strands silvered at the temples. Her face was not bruised, not marked by visible harm, not shaped into the easy evidence people knew how to understand. She looked clean, tired, ashamed. That last part reached Dane before anything else. Her hazel eyes moved from Roman to Maeve, then past them, to Fathom. The door opened wider. Fathom did not rush her. Dane had expected movement, pulling, trembling, some desperate reunion that would make everyone look away. Instead, the dog stood exactly where he was. His whole body shook once, then stilled. His amber eyes fixed on Rosalind with a depth that made the quiet apartment hallway feel suddenly too narrow for human explanations. Rosalind covered her mouth with one hand. "Fathom," she whispered. The dog did not move. Tessa's hand tightened slightly on the extra lead she carried, though Fathom had not pulled. Rosalind stepped into the hall, then stopped herself. She lowered slowly to one knee on the old carpet. Her breath trembled. She did not reach. "I know," she said, her voice nearly gone. "I know I left you in the wrong kind of silence." Fathom's ears shifted. Rosalind closed her eyes, swallowed, and spoke the words as if they cost her more than any confession. "Find the clean line." Fathom went to her, not like a dog released, like a tide finally allowed to return. He crossed the few feet between them and pressed his head into her shoulder. Rosalind folded around him without collapsing, one hand buried in the thick black and tan fur at his neck, the other resting carefully near the scarred tilt of his right ear. She did not sob loudly. She made one small sound and held it back, as if even grief had learned to obey rules in that apartment. Dane looked away, not because the moment was too sentimental, because it was too private. He had thought loyalty meant refusing to leave. Fathom showed him something harder. Loyalty could wait outside a closed door for months, and still not forgive until the right truth was spoken. The apartment was warm, furnished, and terrible in its normality. A small kitchen, a gray sofa, books stacked in neat lines, a desk with no computer, a coat rack with one yellow field vest hanging from it like a ghost that had been allowed to keep its shape. There were no locks on the inside of the door except the ordinary kind. No guard, no threat in sight. Roman took in the room without comment. "Dr. Cade," he said, "are you here, voluntarily?" Rosalind sat on the sofa with Fathom pressed against her legs. She ran her fingers through the fur under his collar before answering. "That depends on what you mean by voluntarily." Roman waited. Rosalind gave a tired smile with no humor in it. "I signed papers. I accepted housing. I agreed to communicate through counsel. I did not have a weapon pointed at me. I was not chained to a radiator. If that is what people need in order to call something coercion, then no, it was not that." Maeve's face hardened. Rosalind looked at her. It was cleaner. The word made the room colder. Over the next hour, Rosalind explained the shape of her disappearance. North Star's lawyers had accused her of misusing proprietary data after she began connecting late-night tanker movement to changes in the lower channel. They threatened civil claims tied to financial damages if her allegations harmed contracts before she had verifiable proof. They said some of her samples had been collected near restricted industrial property. They said her field equipment needed to be reviewed. Her institutional access was frozen. Her communications went through counsel. Emails were sent, implying she had accepted a research opportunity in Norway. "They told people I had moved on," Rosalind said. "It sounded better than saying I had been made inconvenient." Dane said, "Why sign?" Rosalind's hand stopped on Fathom's neck. There was no anger in the way she looked at him. That made the answer heavier. "Because Cyrus told me he needed 6 months." Maeve said, "To do what?" "To replace a failed treatment process without closing North Star in the middle of winter." Rosalind's eyes shone, but she did not look away. "He said if I forced it publicly, The plant would shut down. Buyers would panic, and the first people hurt would be workers who had nothing to do with the decision. He knew exactly which argument would get me. A small silence followed. Dane thought of Alden standing in the harbor hall, asking who paid when truth arrived faster than money could survive it. Rosalind had been asked the same question alone, and she had answered wrong. "I believed I was buying time," she said. "For a fix, for a quiet correction, for a way to save the water without breaking the town." Roman asked, "And after 6 months?" Rosalind looked down at Fathom. There was no fix, only more tanker traffic. She rose and went to the desk. From behind a loose drawer panel, she removed a folded waterproof map, 2 pages of handwritten valve notes, and a small drive wrapped in tape. She set them on the table but did not push them toward Roman until he had placed an evidence bag beside them. "I kept copies," she said. "Not all of it. Enough to prove the system existed if someone found the rest." Roman did not touch the papers with his bare hands. He photographed them first. Celeste was not there, but her discipline had infected the room in the best way. Rosalind pointed to the map. "Below the cannery is an equalization tank. Old infrastructure, modified. Waste stream goes in, gets diluted, then moves through T14 during the falling tide. The valve markings are still from the cannery era, but they added a bypass control. That's why your clean samples mean nothing if you take them at the permitted outfall." Dane leaned over the map but kept his hands behind his back. "Witness, not soldier." Rosalind touched one line. "There is a driver who can confirm timing, Rowan Keel. He works through Keelan Coastal Logistics. He did not design this. He may not even know the full chemistry. But he knows the routes were tide-dependent. Roman wrote the name fully. Rowan Keel did not agree to meet until Rosalind herself called from Roman's phone. They found him at a closed seafood diner on the edge of Harwick, where the parking lot lights hummed over patches of old snow. Rowan was 46, long-limbed and tired-looking, wearing a black work jacket over a gray hoodie. A metal fish-shaped keychain hung from his fingers, turning and turning as he stood beside an idling pickup. He looked first at Roman's badge, then at Dane, then at Rosalind. "You're alive," Rowan said. Rosalind nodded once. He seemed relieved and frightened by the same fact. "I don't know what was in the tanks," he said before anyone accused him. "Paperwork said rinse water. I drove what dispatch gave me." Roman's voice stayed level. "Did dispatch give you tide windows?" Rowan's hand closed around the keychain. "Yes." "Who specified them?" "I got them through Keelan. But the schedule came with North Star's sanitation cycle notes attached sometimes. Not always. Enough that I knew who cared." Dane saw Rosalind close her eyes briefly. Rowan swallowed. "I told myself legal paperwork meant legal work. No one is asking you to solve your whole conscience tonight," Roman said. "I am asking whether you will provide schedules and messages." Rowan looked at Rosalind again, then at Fathom, who sat beside Dane, quiet and watchful. The driver reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. "I saved screenshots," he said, "in case someone ever said I made up the routes." That was the moment the case changed weight. Not solved, not safe, but no longer carried by Dane's damaged credibility, a dog's memory, or a vanished scientist's hidden journal alone. By the time they returned to Bracken Cove, the first snowflakes of the incoming storm were crossing the road sideways. Roman had enough to seek the next step, not because the story was emotional, because it now had a map, a witness, a route, a possible storage system, and a living scientist willing to sign her name beneath what she had once tried to survive by hiding. At the harbor office, Maeve brought Rosalind tea she did not drink. Tessa checked Fathom's pulse, though he was calmer than any human in the room. Dane stood near the window and listened to the harbor. The tide was rising under the dark. Normally, that sound would pull numbers into his mind. Steps, seconds, distances, old calculations meant to keep a man from drowning in a room nowhere near water. Tonight, the numbers came differently. Maeve at the desk, Roman on the phone, Rosalind beside Fathom, Tessa near the door, Celeste driving in from the state office, Merritt waiting for protection, Rowan with screenshots. Dane did not count steps. He counted people. Rosalind looked up from the map. If Cyrus hears I talked, he may clear the system before anyone samples the tank. Roman covered the phone with one hand. Weather may slow them. Outside, wind pushed snow against the glass. Dane looked past the harbor lights toward the south road and the dark coast beyond it. "Or help them hide the trucks," he said. Fathom lifted his head. No one in the room needed to say what that meant. The storm had arrived. So had Rosalind Cade, and for the first time since Fathom had stood alone on a frozen post, the truth was no longer waiting for one man to be brave enough. It had witnesses now. The storm made Bracken Cove look cleaner than it was. Snow blew sideways through the harbor lights, turning the air white and restless. The roofs of the fish sheds disappeared under fresh drifts. Ropes stiffened on the docks. The bay beyond the breakwater moved in dark folds, visible only where light caught the tops of the waves. It was not the kind of storm that shut down a Maine town. It was the kind people used as cover. Roman Hallberg had the warrant before midnight. He did not celebrate it. He read it twice in Maeve Calloway's office, confirmed the addresses, confirmed the scope, and then looked at every person in the room as if assigning weight to silence. Federal investigators would handle the old cannery. Maine environmental officers would document the storage system. Coast Guard support would control the water line. Maeve would manage the harbor perimeter. Celeste Arden would supervise official sampling. Tessa Bellwether would keep Fathom out of any unsafe zone. Dane listened without interrupting. That surprised him. A year ago, maybe even a month ago, he would have searched the plan for the place where he could act alone. Tonight, he searched it for the place where he could make sure no one had to. Fathom sat between Dane and Rosalind Cade, the old yellow survey harness resting across his shoulders. Rosalind's hand stayed near the worn leather collar, not gripping, only touching. The dog's right ear angled toward the south road every time a truck sound pushed through the storm. Roman closed his notebook. "Once we enter, no improvising. If the system is active, we document. If it is inactive, we document. If anyone tries to explain it away, we document that too." Maeve gave Dane a look. He nodded once. "I heard him. I enjoy miracles," Maeve said. The convoy moved without sirens. Snow swallowed the vehicles as they left the harbor and followed the road south, past shuttered seasonal shops, dark lobster pounds, and spruce trees bent under winter weight. Dane rode with Maeve, Fathom, and Tessa. Rosalind rode with Roman. Celeste followed in the state vehicle with sampling coolers and forms. The abandoned cannery appeared slowly through the storm, first as a darker block in the white, then as a roofline, then as broken windows and a rusted fence caught in the sweep of headlights. A tanker stood near the side access lane. Its engine was off. Its metal skin ticked softly in the cold. Fathom was alert before the vehicle stopped. Tessa clipped a second safety lead to his harness. "Outer perimeter only," she said to Dane. "I know. I am saying it for him, too." Fathom glanced back at her as if he found the reminder unnecessary, then lowered his nose to the snow. Roman's team opened the gate under the warrant. No one shouted. No one ran. The quiet made the scene feel more serious. People who knew what they were doing did not need to perform urgency. Fathom led only as far as the roadway edge inside the outer zone. He sniffed near the tanker's rear tire, then the frozen mud behind it, then turned toward the side of the cannery, where snow had drifted against old brick. His movements were controlled, almost restrained, as if he too understood that this was no longer a night for instinct alone. Rosalind followed several steps behind, face pale in the lights. "There," she said before Fathom stopped. A small vent pipe rose from the ground beside the wall, half covered by snow and dead grass. On its rusted cap was a faded mark, T14B. Rosalind's voice changed. "That matches my notes." Fathom placed one paw near the snow but did not touch the metal. Dane crouched beside him. The dog's amber eyes remained fixed on the vent, body tense but steady. "You did your part," Dane said softly. Fathom did not look away. Tessa stepped in. "And now he is done." For once, no one argued. She led Fathom back to Maeve's heated truck, wiped his paws with clean towels, checked the pads for residue or ice cuts, and gave him water. The dog resisted only by staring through the windshield at the cannery lights. Dane watched from outside the open door. All this time, he had feared that needing others would make him less useful. But the sight of Tessa taking Fathom away from the danger did something unexpected inside him. It did not feel like losing control. It felt like the plan working. The victory, if it came, would not belong to the fastest person in the storm. It would belong to everyone who refused to skip their part. Inside the cannery, the air smelled of old metal, wet concrete, and cold storage that had been empty too long. Federal technicians found the access plates beneath plywood and stacked pallets. Celeste documented every step before the covers were lifted. Roman asked short questions. No one touched anything until it had been photographed. Below the floor sat the equalization tank. Not enormous, not theatrical. A practical hidden chamber, modified with newer valves, flexible connections, and a control box mounted behind a false utility panel. It looked less like a monster than a bad decision maintained by invoices. That made Dane angrier. A monster could be feared. This had been managed. Celeste collected the first official samples directly from the tank system. Her gloved hands moved with almost severe care. Bottle, label, time, location, seal, witness. She read every code aloud. Roman found the pump logs in the control box memory. The times matched Rowan Keel's screenshots. Merritt Shaw, connected by secure video from an attorney's office, confirmed that some earlier lab flags aligned with the same operating windows. His face looked pale on the tablet screen, but his voice did not break when he said his own name and title for the record. Celeste reviewed the field readings and looked at Roman. This is sufficient to preserve and shut down the system pending full analysis. Roman nodded. Seal it. The word moved through the building like a door closing. But one question remained. The tank and logs showed storage and movement. The map showed the T-14 route. To confirm the physical connection to the old outfall near Bracken Cove, the underwater valve cluster at the pipe mouth had to be identified and documented. Dane knew that section of water better than anyone in the room. He felt the shift before anyone spoke. Maeve looked at him. Roman looked at him. Rosalind looked down. Outside, the tide was turning toward slack. The storm pressed snow against the walls. The old sound began in Dane's mind before the water could reach him. Hollow impact, enclosed breathing, a voice in the dark asking for one more second that had not existed. Dane waited for the old answer. I'll go. This time, he did not let it leave his mouth. If I assist, he said slowly, there is a second diver. Surface tender, full line communication, slack tide only, abort on any current change, no exceptions. And I do not go because anyone thinks I need to prove something. Roman studied him. Maeve's expression softened by the smallest amount. The Coast Guard lead, a broad-shouldered petty officer with ice crusting the edge of his hood, nodded. Those are the terms we would require anyway. Dane almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because once he would have mistaken sensible limits for doubt. The dive was short. It did not feel short. Cold entered through every seam that was not perfectly sealed. The water closed over Dane's helmet and turned the storm into a muffled world of rope tension, breath, and dim light. The surface tender's voice came through the line at steady intervals. Status. Good. Depth. Holding. Visibility. Low but workable. Dane moved along the pipe by touch more than sight. The old concrete was rough under his gloves. Silt lifted in slow clouds. Somewhere above, the town existed with its lights and fears and jobs and arguments. Down here there was only the line, the breath, the rule that no man was allowed to become braver than the plan. He found the valve cluster at the edge of the outfall. A newer fitting sat bolted into older metal. He began to count. 1, 2, 3. The numbers rose from habit, as familiar as pain. He stopped them, not by force, by choice. He pressed his glove against the valve housing and keyed the line. I have visual confirmation, he said. His voice sounded calm even to himself. Newer bypass fitting attached to the old T-14 assembly. The surface tender answered, copy, marking location. Dane held the light steady while the camera recorded. Then he came up. On the dock, snow struck his face like cold sparks. Maeve was there when his helmet came off. So was Roman. So was Rosalind, standing beside Tessa's truck with Fathom visible through the fogged glass. Dane looked toward the German shepherd. Fathom's ears were up. For once, the dog did not look as if he was waiting for someone to understand. He looked as if someone finally had. By dawn, the system was sealed, the samples were logged, and North Star Marine Foods was placed under partial operational suspension pending a wider review. The plant was not erased from the town. The workers were not blamed as a crowd. The investigation widened toward Keelan Coastal Logistics, North County Analytical, and the decisions inside North Star's management chain. Cyrus Fenwick arrived after sunrise, wearing a black parka and the face of a man who had slept less than he wanted others to know. He stood outside the cannery gate while federal vehicles moved behind him. "You understand what you have done, Cyrus?" asked Dane. Dane was still in thermal layers beneath his coat, hair wet at the temples, body tired in a clean way. "I understand what was found." Cyrus's jaw tightened. "This town survives by inches. You may have just taken away the inch we needed." Dane had no speech ready. He was glad of that. Rosalind stepped beside him, her yellow field vest bright under her coat. Fathom stood with her now, safe on clean snow, his harness dry, his gaze steady. "A town is not saved by asking people to breathe the cost of its silence," Rosalind said. Cyrus looked at her then, not like a man surprised she was alive, like a man disappointed she had chosen to be visible. Before he could answer, Alden Pierce crossed the snow from the line of lobster captains gathered near Maeve's perimeter. His old Mercy Gale cap was in his hand. He did not apologize to Dane, not in words. He looked at Rosalind, then Roman, then the sealed cannery. "If the state needs boats to move inspectors around the lower channel," Alden said, "Mercy Gale can go by noon." Behind him, another captain nodded. Then another. The town did not heal in that moment, but it shifted. In the weeks that followed, the story did not become simple. Nothing honest did. North Star was allowed to reopen limited operations under independent oversight while the treatment system was replaced. The workers were kept separate from the decisions made above them whenever the facts allowed it. Rowan Keel received witness protection within the investigation process. Merritt Shaw kept his certification after cooperating fully. Nola Vickers gave her teal notebook to the State Health Review, and no one in Bracken Cove was allowed to call those adult workers' symptoms, winter complaints, quite so easily again. Rosalind returned to the harbor with sample cases, official monitors and Fathom at her side. Some people avoided her eyes. Others brought coffee and pretended that was not an apology. Fathom worked with her again, but each morning he made a detour to the harbor office. He would push the door open with his nose, find Dane, accept one brief scratch beneath the chin, then return to Rosalind as if checking that both parts of the world remained in place. 3 weeks after the storm, Bracken Cove woke under new snow and clean sunlight. Dane stood at the top of the East Pier stairs. Fathom waited beside him, off-duty, the worn collar visible beneath his winter-thick fur. Below them, lobster boats prepared to leave harbor. Alden's Mercy Gale idled near the outer float. The tide was rising, dark and steady under the planks. Dane started down. 1, 2, 3. At the 11th step, Fathom stopped to watch a boat nose gently against the dock. Dane stepped past him. 2 more steps. Then he realized he had lost the count. His body waited for the old command. "Go back. Start over. Make the number right before the water comes closer." Dane stood still. The tide rose below. The world did not tilt. Fathom looked back at him, amber eyes bright in the winter sun. Dane let out one breath and continued down the stairs. He did not start over. At the bottom, the pier held, the water moved, and Dane Ostrander walked beside the dog named for depth without needing to know exactly how many steps stood between him and the sea. Sometimes the hardest thing is not finding the truth. It is deciding what to do with it when the truth threatens the life we know. Dane, Rosalind, Fathom, and the people of Bracken Cove remind us that silence can feel safer for a while. But peace built on silence never truly holds. Real courage is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like waiting for the right evidence, telling the truth with trembling hands, protecting the innocent, and refusing to let fear make our choices for us. And maybe grace often comes quietly too, through a loyal dog, a second chance, a steady friend, or one brave step we do not take alone. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which moment stayed with you most. And if you want more stories of loyalty, courage, and quiet justice, please subscribe. May you have the courage to choose what is right, and the peace to know you are not walking alone.